So today we're going to talk about Joshua 23. So before getting to Joshua 23, let's talk about what happened before the passage. So first part of Joshua, you can see that Israel's transitioning from Moses to Joshua. So they transition, then they do the whole conquest of the Holy Land. Then you see a crisis develop in Israel, but then it's resolved. And you get to this point, you get to Joshua 23. In Joshua 23, Joshua's trying to show Israel to remain faithful to God and that He's in control of their life. So, in the first few verses of Joshua 23, Joshua says, "A long time after, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all the surrounding enemies, and Joshua was old and well and advanced in years, Joshua summoned all of Israel and his elders and heads, his judges, officers, and said to them, I am old and well, advanced in years, and you have seen all the Lord your God has done to these nations for your sake. For it is the Lord your God who has fought for you. Behold, I have allotted to you an inheritance for your tribes, those nations that remain, along with all the nations that I have already cut off, from the Jordan to the great sea in the west. The Lord your God will push them out back before you and drive them out of your sight. And you will possess their land just as the Lord your God promised you." So, in the first part of Joshua 23, you can see Joshua's trying to remind Israel what God has done for Israel. So, you can see that victory after victory, when they let God be in control of as a nation and individually, they're doing victory after victory because God's in control of their life. So we can also see in these chapters God's promise. So God's promise in the first part is that He'll basically drive them out of the Holy Land. So what we can basically learn from this is, as we stay faithful to God and let Him be in control of our life, that He will be there with us no matter what the situation is in our life. One of the situations that I faced while at seminary was paying for rent. I remained faithful to God and let Him control my life. And so when I went to pay rent, when it was due, I didn't have to pay it. Someone had magically, I guess by name, paid my rent and basically gave me a credit on my account. So I prayed to God to remind Him that He had control of my life. And because of that, He sent someone to pay for something I did not have the money to pay for. I never figured out who it was. So the next thing we can see in the verses comes from verses 6 through 11. And 6 through 11 says this, "Therefore be very strong to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law, turning aside from it neither to the right hand nor to the left, that you may mix with these nations remaining among you, or make mention of these names of their gods, and or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. But you shall cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done to this day. For the Lord has driven out before you great and strong nations, and for you no man has been able to stand before you this day. One man of you put fight 1,000, since it is the Lord your God who fights for you, just as he promised. Be very careful, therefore, to love your God and to love your God. For if you turn back and cling to the remnant of these nations remaining, read too far. Sorry about that. So in these next few verses, you can see Joshua is trying to tell Israel to hold fast to God's word. So God's word is our sword. So basically, in any situation that we can face in our life, we can see that someone else has faced it in this book. So as we hold fast to God's word and remember what God has said in the past, it can help us with our current situation. So in these verses, we can see that be very strong to keep what is written in the book of the law. So Joshua is trying to tell Israel, remember what is written in the book of the law. So I'm telling you to remember what is written in the law, because the Ten Commandments can help us throughout our day if we remember what is written. In the Ten Commandments. Because if we abide by the Ten Commandments, which is part of the book of the law of Moses, we can be with God and remain faithful to God. We can remain faithful to Him, and God is also in control of our life at the same time. So the last thing we can see in Joshua 23, for if you turn back and cling to the remnants of these nations remaining among you, make marriages of them, so that you associate with them, and they with you, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they shall be a snare and a trap for you, a whip on your side, thorns in your eye, until you perish from off this good ground that the Lord your God has given you. And now I am about to go away of all the earth, and you know in your heart and soul, and all of you, that not one word has failed of all good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you. All have come to pass for you. Not one of them have failed, but just as all good things the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled for you, so that the Lord will bring upon you an evil thing until He destroyed you from off good land that the Lord your God has given you. If you transgress the covenant of your Lord, which He has commanded you, go and serve other gods and bow down to them, then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and you shall perish quickly off the good land that He has given you. So the last part of Joshua 23, it's basically a cause and effect for this chapter. So the cause of this is basically like intermarriage. So when we think intermarriage, it's not what we think today. It's basically a religious intermarriage. So basically, you wouldn't want to go out and find someone that basically worship voodoo. Because if you marry someone that worships voodoo, then more likely you're going to fall to voodoo. Because you're going to see what your significant other is doing for voodoo, learn the ways of that, and fall from God and go to voodoo. So we can see that earlier how when Scott was preaching how some of the tribes did not drive out everybody in the land. So, and because they said they could live among them. So, and that's basically the crisis that happened. So, Joshua is reminding them that to remain faithful to God and let God be in control of their life, because you don't want to intermarriage with another faith, because that other faith will basically have control over your life, and therefore you will have two masters. And as we know in the New Testament, you cannot have two masters. You can only have one master. So, as we leave today, I'm just going to leave you with a couple things. Remember what God has done for you so far in your life. Let God be in control of everything in your life. And just remember the warnings, not in the book of Joshua, but the warnings throughout the whole Bible. Because there's hundreds and thousands of warnings that God has given us through the whole book, not just in one chapter.